Hey guys, this is Evan from Stock Music Musician, and today I'm going to walk you through a tutorial on some creative ways of side chaining in Reason. Now, it's going to start with the most basic way to side chain. This might be pretty popular and common for some of you, but it was requested. And then we're going to move into some more interesting ways of side chaining later on in the video. So even if you've been using Reason and side chaining for a while, I hope that you'll find something new here as we go on. Then next week I'm going to put out a video on some of the creative ways of actually using side chaining. So after you've figured out how to create a side chain, I'm going to show you some cool things you can do with it next week. But today let's dig into some of the fun ways of using side chaining. So we're just going to start out with a very simple beat in redrum. The point of this is not to make a good beat, but to show you how side chaining works. So without further ado, drum roll, please. So right now we just have a basic redrum going on. So to start out with this version of side chaining, what we're going to do is actually create separate mixer channels for the kick drum and the snare. And I'll just say this lesson's really going to focus on using a kick to drive the side chain, but you can use anything to trigger it. So first what I'm going to do is just quickly set up a channel for this, and then we'll actually, after I show you the first example, we'll dig into what side chaining really is. So first I'm going to create a mix channel, and we'll call this one kick, and we'll create another mix channel, and we'll call this snare. So if we look at the mixer here, we've got kick and we've got snare. So if we hit the play button, nothing's happening. There's nothing being sent to these right now. But now and there's no data on the transport, but if we go now to the channel and hit tab to flip them backwards, we're going to take the input from kick and send it to the input here, and so this is the kick channel, this is the snare channel, so on, and we'll take the input or the output of the snare channel and put it into the snare mix channel. Now if we go to the mixer and hit play, you'll notice there you've got the kick, and there's the snare. So now the redrum channel itself isn't actually doing anything. Now we're going to create something that we want side chained. So I'm just going to go over to the instrument panel. Let's create we'll just use a Rex loop with some music here. Flip it around, and let's open up just a music loop. Rhodes, because if you haven't already caught on to this channel, I love a Rhodes. So loop playback's enabled. I hate this drum beat, so let's just change. Alright. So anyway, that's not really the point of this, as I've said already. But let's put some hi-hats on just because we're going to be listening to this for a while. So the hi-hats are coming on the hi-hat channel, kick, snare, and now we've got this Rhodes playing, but no side chaining is going on right now. So what we need to do is insert, and this is the first way of doing it, but insert a compressor, effects, M-class compressor. So if we stop with the default routing, the output from the Dr. Rex is this red wire. It's going into the input here of the Rhodes mix channel, which is then going from the insert effect out and into the compressor, and the output of the compressor is then going back into the Rhodes mix channel. So that means that this compressor here is compressing just the Rhodes. So this is what the Rhodes sounds like without compression. And now we'll crush it. And you can hear there, that's just a totally mangled Rex loop. But what sidechaining does is instead of using the Rex loop to trigger the compression, it uses another sound source. And in this case, it's going to be the kick. So what we can do is use the parallel out from this mix channel and put it into the sidechain in of the compressor. So that means now instead of the loud parts of the Rex loop triggering the compressor, it is now when the kick drum hits that the compressor is going to be engaged. However, the compressor is going to be compressing the Rex loop still. So the Rhodes is still going to be compressed, but the compressor is not going to be reacting to the Rex to trigger the compression signal. Instead, it's going to be reacting to the kick. So let's hit play and dial this in. And we'll start with a low compression ratio and medium settings, and we'll slowly show you how it works. So now you can't hear any side chaining yet. And we'll actually just only do the kick. So you can already hear it ducking down. And the attack and release will trigger how long it takes. So if we want a more extreme sound, you can adjust these two and dial it just in. And now if we bypass the compressor, you'll hear exactly what's going on. So the sidechain is making the Rhodes go down in volume, almost like an automated volume control. So that's the first way of using a Rex loop, or of using a compressor for side chaining. And this is probably the simplest and most straightforward way of doing it in Reason. This is the way that you do it most of the time. But now what we're going to do is start making this more and more complicated. And then I'll show you some alternate methods as well. So let's say that you've got both this Rex loop, and we'll create another instrument loop, or another Rex loop. What key is this in? It doesn't say, so let's find something we actually know what the key is. All right. We're going to use, we got the bass loop there. Now we're going to use a Rhodes in the key of C as well. So now we've got the kick driving the Rhodes, but we also want the bass to be driven and ducked. So we could create a compressor here, but right now the compressor is just compressing the bass, and there's only one parallel out from the kick. So how do you get the kick drum to drive both the bass and the keyboard? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the first one, and then I'll show you a couple more. And this is a way of getting more triggers out of one. Simplest way is probably to use the Spider audio merger. And this is a really simple device, but it's a must use. So what it does is this will be this input now will create 4 new outputs. So I'm going to put the sidechain in here, and right now it's not connected to anything, but I now have 4 sidechain outs. So you're going to go right here. So it's still, now it's driving it again, and I can use this extra copy. And so now the bass is also, the compressor on the bass is also being sidechained to the kick. So, I mean, these aren't really necessarily usable sounds, but I'm just trying to show you the most extreme version. And we'll turn down the output gain to make up for the boost to input. Okay, and now we'll bring the Rhodes back in. And we'll bypass the sidechain. So you hear just a straightforward volume of both of these with the sidechains bypass, but listen to how it starts to pump and breathe once we unbypass them. Okay, so that's method one for getting multiple instruments sidechain from a single source. Now I'm going to show you a second way of doing it, and this can be really helpful as well. So we're going to delete these compressors, and we're going to go to the mixer now. Actually, we don't need to even go to the mixer. We can click on both of these channels using select or adding control, and we're going to route them to a new output bus. So this means that both of these channels now are being sent to this bus. So if we hit play, this contains both of them, volume, panning, all of that for both of them. So now we can just use one compressor, and we can send the kick signal either from the spider or from the parallel to the bus, the sidechain. And there you go. It's pumping again, and you don't need to do as much wiring. Another way of doing this is to go, and this works either, you don't have to use an M-class compressor. You can use any compressor with a sidechain in, and also all mixed channels have the ability to be sidechained right here in the dynamics section. Now this is controlled here on the compressor setting for this bus. When key is in, it means it's going on. So but the thing I like about the M-class compressor especially is you've got useful controls for attack and delay, whereas with the master channel, or attack and release, whereas with the master channel you only have a release setting and the fast button, so you don't have as much control over shaping your envelopes. So that is one way of getting multiple sources from a single signal sidechained. And this can be really useful later on in mixing. For example, if you want to have the vocals duck the entire like guitar section to get them out of the way. So that's the second way of getting multiple signals. Now we'll disconnect all of this and all of this, and we don't want the bus anymore. A third way of doing this, if you look back previously, I had a video on the right way of using send effects in Reason. And this is probably not the preferred way of doing it, but there are definitely situations where this can be useful as well. So we'll create an MCAS compressor in this blank effect sound, and we'll call this Sidechain. That's a really clever name, but I think it's appropriate. So now what we're going to do is have the sidechain in coming from the parallel outs again. And so right now nothing is going to this channel aside from the sidechain signal. The Rhodes and the bass are unaffected, but if we go here now, we can send the bass and the Rhodes to the sidechain. So you can have, I'm going to pan the sidechain effect over. So right now the sidechain is playing in addition to the regular signal, but it can create sort of an interesting amount of movement. So let's mute this. There's no sidechaining here. And here's a that's another option. And if you just want the sidechain, then you go to pre, and that basically makes the fader irrelevant, and these knobs now control the relative volume. And we only have now the music from the sidechain through the effects bus. So that's another way of getting multiple signals. Now what we're going to talk about is dealing with sub-optimum samples. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say instead of having your own beat that you've built, you'd rather use a Rex loop for drums. So let's create a Rex or a loop or any, a sample, anything like that. So again, you know how I feel about those. So let's just go. I always like these chemical beats. That's a perfect one. All right, so we've got this drum beat here, and if we were to send, let me do the bus real quick, just because that'll make things fast. So now here's the compressor bus. Let's create an M-class compressor, and if we were to use the parallel output to control the compressor here, the problem that we have is that everything on the drum loop that is loud is triggering the compressor. This means the snare, the crash, and the kick, whenever they hit, they are going to trigger the compressor. And that's not the way you usually want the pumping to go. It's either going to be the snare or the kick or something else, but you don't really want the whole loop most of the time. So how do you fix that? Well, don't worry. That's what I'm here for. But if you've enjoyed this up to now, I'd really like it and appreciate it if you could give me a like, a comment, subscribe. If you don't like this, tell me why. If there's something else you'd like to learn about, please leave a comment and I'd be happy to do a lesson on it. And if there's some other cool sidechain trick that I don't know about, please show that to me too. So we've got this loop and we want it really only the kick to trigger the sidechain. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one of the most useful effects in Reason, the M-class stereo imager, but we're not going to use it to create a stereo image. So hold down Shift when you create it, and this means it's not going to be cabled to anything. And the important part here is that we're going to use the crossover. What the stereo imager lets you do is split signals based on the frequency. It's basically a high pass and a low pass filter, and you can solo either just the high part or just the low part. So what we're going to do instead is take the parallel output from the drum beat, put it into the stereo imager. And then we're going to, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do the separate out here and have low band selected, or you can flip it to the other side and there's a solo. We'll just do separate out low band here, and that's going to now drive the sidechain. And this is just what I'm talking about. You can also just, if you're using audio output, you can use these things to solo one or the other. So this chooses where the cutoff is. So now this is driving the sidechain, and right now everything below 6,000 kilohertz is going into the compressor to trigger it for sidechain. And you hear it's still pretty much everything. The snare is going to be in there, the crash. But now it's really the kick that's, we'll turn on the So that's a great way of using snare samples and loops to trigger sidechain compression, even if you don't have the perfect source material. Another way you can do it, and this is a lot more complicated and it's going to take way more time, but it would be the more accurate way of doing it, is we can run this loop here and choose select slice by media. And you can see some of these slices, this kick hits. Now, unfortunately, on this sample, the snare also hits. But, for example, you could take this slice, which has a kick, and you could do output 1 and 2 instead. So this means it's not going to be coming out of the main output. Instead, it's going to be coming out of output 1 and 2, slice output, and the main. So listen, you don't hear that first one. So you need to create a mixer channel. And this is just sort of like what we did with the reed drum. And you could call this kick. And then you'd route slice 1 and 2 here. And now this would be the volume of the kick. So you'll hear if we run this. Kick is now coming through this channel. And then you could route it to the parallel outs to a compressor. So that's a second way of getting a loop to trigger the side chain without having to break everything up. So those are some really different ways of using and accessing side chains. And I just want to show you a couple of more ways you can do it if you want to get really creative with things. I'm going to delete the stereo imager. So now we've got the bus, and because there's no sidechain, it's compressing itself. So we've just got this loop here, and now I want to show you some other fun stuff you can do to trigger the sidechain. So the first thing you can do is to use sort of a ghost effect, a ghost tool. And that can either, you can use a matrix. Well, I think reed drum is probably, actually let's do that, a reed drum. So we go to instruments, hold shift. Like, let's say you don't really want an actual 4 on the floor, boom, 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 bass in your song, bass drum in your song, but you still want things to pump. Well, this reed drum, its audio output isn't connected to anything. So it's sort of this ghost that just exists for the sole purpose, and we'll create a kick here. You can hear it's running, or you can see it's running, but you can't hear it. And now the output of this kick is going to be going into the side chain. Whoa, come back here. So you see, you still can get that pumping sound without having to have a 4 on the floor kick. Another way you can do this is to let's use Pulsar, Pulsar, another one of my favorites. So Pulsar dual LFO. This is just creating a CV signal in the shape of this waveform. But how can you know? Well, let's see. Can you do the audio in? Does that do anything? I don't know. Let's see. So this is traveling in the shape of a wave. And so let's so you can see it ramping up. Just like the shape of that. And you can also, the level controls how extreme it's going to be. There's some interesting shapes here. This sort of steps up more and more. You can sync it. You can have it triggered by an envelope with this part. And you can also invert it. So it gets quiet when this is bit, or it gets quieter and louder, etc. Another way you can do this is to use, let's say, you want to create sort of some interesting automation for your side chaining. So this is going to be the last one that I show you in this section about how to actually trigger a side chain and how to create a side chain effect. And the next lesson next week is going to show you some very creative uses of side chains to either trigger or decay reverbs, to use pinpoint EQ, so that, let's say, when you play like the kick drum, you just want the low end to drop out of the bass, but you don't actually want the volume of the high end to drop out of the bass. I'm going to show you some very just simple but powerful mixing tricks to get more space in your mix with sidechain. It's not going to be like the extreme electronic effect that you're used to hearing, but it's a very powerful tool that you should think about including in your mixes. And of course, I'll show you how to just do the straightforward, powerful, 4 on the floor, house type sidechain. So without further ado, we're going to pull up the last effect, and that's going to be the okay, I guess you're a propeller head software device. See my comments about how I feel about Reason, because I do not like how the menus are set up. But anyway, so we don't actually want the audio from this to control it. Instead, the audio from the compressor is going to go back in here. And this isn't going to generate an audio sound now. We could do the parallel in and out, and that would do it. But really what I want is the CV values here. So I'll show you what I mean. We're going to reset this device, so now there's no automation. But we're going to use channel 1 to slowly, basically this is the shape of the sidechain I want to use, just for giggles and yucks. So if we hit play right now, it's sidechaining itself, which is not what we want. There's nothing controlling the sidechain. And this is running, but it's not affecting anything. And the sidechain takes audio, the sidechain in, but the synchronous curves are CV. So how the hell do you have synchronous do this? And you probably want to put it in unipolar mode, which means there's only an up and down, at least for this purpose. And now in the combinator, you click on the M-class compressor. And so now you're programming the automation of the M-class compressor. And so we're going to choose CV1, which is what's coming from the synchronous, and its target is going to be we could say the output gain. And this isn't truly sidechaining, but you're controlling the volume automatedly through another device with a compressor. And like you could do half. Now there's no reason you would have to use a compressor, but this is just sort of a way to get creative with it. So, thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed.